We understand that that's how David got into the picture. He's already been anointed, but he's out taking care of sheep. This is going to give him the opportunity now to get in the courts of the king. But wouldn't it have been better if the servant said, hey, Saul, you need to repent. And let's go get Samuel and bring him here. And let Samuel lead you through the steps to get right with God. Wouldn't that have been the right thing to do? Yeah. But what do? Let's get some music to help you. Now, again, God's in this. I understand it's the way David got into the picture. But there was a better way. Let me read something here. One of the blogs that I was reading. Excuse me. Am I going to mess up this sound here? No, it's all right. Hold on. Okay. Listen to this. Let this sink in. This kind of method drowns all care of the soul in the delights of the senses. That's what an old-time church father said. This method, he had an evil spirit. What's the solution? Get right with God. But what path did they take? They drowned the care of the soul. Let's not worry about the soul. Let's just focus on the delight of the senses. Calm you down. And it did work to a certain extent. It worked.
Medicated.
Okay, so you can think of all kinds of modern ways, folks. I thought this guy was right on, spot on. Listen, when we've got a problem, the best thing to do is go for the right solution, not pacify yourself with whatever.
But maybe that was the method, since God had a plan, that he made it happen that way.
It's true, and that's what we're saying, that got David into the picture. But technically, they should have gone to the root problem.
Yes. If they had gone to the root problem.
Okay.
God would have still gotten David into the picture because David was intended to be king.
Right.
He just would have done it a different method.
He probably would have done it a different way.
He's already told us David is the king.
So, go ahead, Chuck.
It wouldn't be written this way.
Oh, yeah.
We're not
That's
learning
right.
a lesson if the other things happen.
That's right. So we're learning from frail human beings. They didn't do it the right way. God still used it. So let me just throw it out. In your own mind, think. When you've got something that's troubling your soul, how do you go about it? Now, you can put on soft music, sweet music. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with music. But the question is, are you dealing with the root problem? Some people drink away their problems. Some people medicate. Well, question, is that dealing with the problem? No, right? So take this principle and apply it any way you want. And I'm just pulling that out of here. I know it. When I was reading this, it kind of jumped out at me like, wait a minute. Why didn't they go get Samuel, the spiritual leader of the nation? Bring him in and say, Samuel, you got to talk to Saul. Because we read in that chapter, Saul no longer had any communication with Samuel. Samuel's out of the picture. Once God rejected it, he was...
Still, that's how we would have done it, but that is not what God's plan was. It happened the way he planned it.
Right. That's true.
I mean, you and I might have done different.
Right.
But you can't say, well, God, he should have never done that.
But remember that God can use the mishaps of man. Remember what Joseph said to his brothers?
They still have free will. They could have
Right.
chosen a different method.
Yeah.
That's true.
We have the free will, and that's where you get into the black box thing.
Yeah. So remember, I brought this out a lot at the end of Genesis when Joseph confronts his brothers who sold him into slavery. All those wasted years of it, the prime of his life, he spent in jail, and he spent wasted as a slave and all that. And yet he looked at his brothers and he said, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. So even though they didn't do the right thing, God still turned it around for his glory. And that's something only God can do. You and I can't do that. Man, we messed up, but God somehow...
But I think Earl has a point in phrase it,
Yeah.
God meant it for good.
Yes.
God used it for good.
Yeah.
God meant it for good. So
Right.
like Earl said, it was also God's handiwork that it happened this way.
And here we are thousands of years later looking at it, and we're going, oh, I can learn from this.
Free will and God.
So there you go. We learn. Okay.
Hadn't
So,
Saul already used up his 3 chances with Samuel? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
I can imagine if he had told Samuel, Samuel would have said, no way.
No, we're
Told that
done.
guy I'm never seeing him again.
Done.
He's had it. You know?
yeah.
But there's other priests, and there's, I mean,
Right.
the fact is, he could have made different choices.
He could have. So this fellow goes on to say, how much better friends had they been to him if they had advised him, since the evil spirit was from the Lord, to give all diligence to make his peace with God by true repentance, to send for Samuel and pray with him, to intercede with God for him. Then might he not only have had some present relief, but the good spirit would have returned. Okay, so we learn from this. Okay, let's look at chapter 17. Just thought I'd mention that before we move on. Now, chapter 17 is a story of David and Goliath. Okay, you've all heard this story before, so hopefully you won't fall asleep as we read it. And in fact, my voice is dying, so is there someone who would like to read, let's say from verses 1 to 8? Someone want to read 1 to 8? Yeah, go ahead, Chuck.
Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle, and were gathered together at Shakah, which belongeth to Judah, and pitched between Shakah and Azekah and Ephes Dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together and pitched by the valley of Elah, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, and there was a valley between them. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. And he had an helmet of brass upon his head. And he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. And he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. And one bearing a shield went before him. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel, and said unto them, Why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Am not I a Philistine, and ye servants of Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. If he be able to fight with me, and to kill me, then we shall be your servants. But if I prevail against him, and kill him, then shall ye be our servants, and serve us.
Okay. Interesting. The Philistines, they've been a thorn in the side of the Israelites all along. They assemble themselves for battle. And this guy, Goliath of Gath. Now, I wanted to spend some time, I'll just maybe rehearse it, but when the children of Israel in Numbers 13, it started there, when they got to the edge of the land, they sent the spies in. Remember what happened?
Yeah.
10 and 2. 10 said, oh, they're big people. No way, we can't go in there. We're like grasshoppers in their sight. 2 said, Joshua and Caleb, let's go for it. God gave us the land. What are we waiting for? But what did the people do? They followed the 10. So they spent time out in the wilderness, 40 years, till that whole generation died off. And I think I told you that if you take the number of people in the book of Numbers, 1,800,000, something like that, and you divide it by 40 years, it's about 50 to 60 people a day, on average, had to die for that whole generation to die off. Now, obviously, some days it was more, some less, but 50 funerals a day for 40 years. What kind of a vacation is that? It's not. It's burying people along the way, the whole way. bury people, funeral, bury people, funeral. That's what their life was for 40 years. God was telling them, don't mess with me, right? I said go in, you said no, so then go. You can die in the wilderness until the next generation comes back to the same spot. And guess what? Kadesh Barnea, we're going to go in. Now, does everybody want to go in? And they all went in, right? But the point is, they saw giants in the land. Giants. The Anakim. Anakim means tall people. Okay, but when Joshua, and I think Caleb was one of the last ones, he wanted a mountain, so he had to fight off the Anakim. There were giants living in the area. They were, apparently it was some hereditary thing where they were tall. Now, this guy, Goliath, is 9 feet. I think if you add up the cubits, 9 feet, 4 inches, something like that. That's tall. If you think about it, that line right there is 8 feet, right? This is an 8-foot wall, I think. So go another foot on up. That's a tall guy.
Yeah, Chuck looked up some of the heights and weights. What did you?
Oh, did you? Okay.
The breastplate, the coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass.
Mm-hmm.
That's 125 pounds of brass this man's wearing.
Well, breastplate.
That's just the chain that he's wearing. His spear,
Amazing.
when they talk about the weaver's post, that's a main post where all these women sit around and weave all day.
Yeah.
So it's about this big around, and the head of the arrow is 15 pounds. It's of iron. 15-pound head. A guy rebuilt it. I went to the site, and he actually, but yeah, this is a heavy-duty, big, strong guy. It's like a tank.
Yeah.
Do you think people were probably shorter back then than we
Yeah.
are now, too?
Oh,
Could be.
The Israelites
They
were.
really were.
So this was a family of tall people, tribe of tall people. And even if you look up 2 Samuel, when David becomes king later on, he's still fighting the giants. He's still running into sons of Anakim, these tall people. And so they were very prevalent in that area, down by the south, Gaza and below. So this guy Goliath, he's a pretty big guy. And I want you to see what he says in verse 8. Now think of the logic here, okay? Parallelism. You know what that means? You take one sentence and then the second sentence should be parallel. Watch the parallelism, verse 8. Why are you come out to set in battle array? Okay, there's the question. Here it is. Am I not a Philistine? Okay, there's the first sentence. I'm a Philistine. Look at the parallel sentence that follows. You are servants to Saul. What's he saying? Think about it. I'm a free Philistine.
No.
You all are slaves to a man named Saul. What a put down. If you were on our side, you'd be free. You'd be like us. We're strong. I'm a Philistine. I'm not servant to anybody. But you all, you're servants.
Well, and also, Pastor,
Go ahead.
the array of these guys, there's a
Yeah.
valley,
Mhm.
and you've got a hill and a hill. And so
Right.
he's down in here, and so when he's yelling up, it's loud,
Yeah.
like you said, some of these guys are looking at each other in camp going, we're servants? What are we talking about? So,
He's very intimidating, is what he is. Because for 40 days, he comes out every day and says this. Yeah, he's...
harassing.
Verse 9, I want you to look at the promise. What do they say? There's nothing... A promise among thieves is worthless, something like that. There's a saying. Look at the promise. If he, that is, choose someone, send him out. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. Ooh. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you will be my servants. Serve us. So in other words, let's not deal with a lot of bloodshed. Let's just send 2 people. And whoever wins, the others will serve them, right? Let's avoid all the conflict. Let's just get it over with. Okay, if you know the end of the story, a promise among thieves means nothing. What happens when David kills Goliath? Do they all go, oh, now we're serving all the Israelites? No, they take off. So much for their promise, right? So really, this guy was a scoundrel. His word was worth 0. You can't trust a guy like this. In fact, that's what David brings up later, which is really interesting here. This is like a little seed of can we really trust this guy? And then David picks up on it. So who wants to read from 10 to, let's say, 15? Somebody want to read 10? Yeah, go ahead, Luann.
And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was a son of that Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse, and he had 8 sons. And the man went among men for an old man in the days of Saul. And the 3 eldest sons of Jesse went and followed Saul to the battle. And the names of his 3 sons that went to the battle were Eli the firstborn, and next unto him Abinadab, and the 3rd Shammah. And David was the youngest, and the 3 eldest followed Saul. But David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem.
Okay, so the writer is telling us something about who would be inscripted or enlisted. Conscripted is the word for the military, not the old guys. So Jesse's left out. He's told. We find out here that the father's old. Can't have him be a warrior, and you can't have David. He's too young. So the only ones left are the middle guys, the sons. So it gives us a picture of how Israel was working. If you were an able-bodied man, you were supposed to fight.
Right.
When they called you up, you went.
Plowshare and spears.
Yeah, that's right. You just grabbed whatever, and they enlisted you in the army. All right. Oh, let me mention one thing. If you look at the armor, as we were reading it there, verse 5, the helmet and the coat of mail, shekels of brass, his legs were covered. Good thing, because he's usually fighting short guys. And they would probably go for his legs, right? I mean, you can't reach his head, so what are you going to do? But you know what's interesting? The only unprotected part of it, he had a helmet, but nothing covered his face. It doesn't mention that he had mail, metal across his face. The only unprotected area, everything else was protected. And that's the one area that David hit. Isn't that amazing?
That is amazing. He's good with that.
So he thought he was invincible.
Invincible, yeah.
And he's boasting like he is. But now, God knew. Yeah. Yeah.
There's people that can actually do that with a sling.
Oh, yeah.
On YouTube, you can see videos of guys actually throwing a sling about 40 yards away
right.
and just hitting the bullseye.
Yeah.
David was proficient at that.
And he had a lot of practice. We're going to see here in a minute. He's going to talk about his experience. But, yeah, so what he says, the Philistine, verse 10 says, I defy the armies of Israel. Now, wait a minute. What did God said to the Israelites? I will fight for you. Remember, he made that very clear to Joshua. It's your land. Get your armies together and I'll fight for you. So when he's defying the armies of God, who is he defying? God himself. Yeah. And David's going to pick up on that in a minute. So David, it says in verse 12, he's the son of the Ephrathite. Ephrathite is just the area where Bethlehem is. Jesse, he had 8 sons. And anyway, the 3 oldest sons were with Saul in battle. That's verse 13, mentions them. And David went back to feed the sheep. He's too young to fight. All right, so let's read on from 16 through, let's say, 21. Somebody want to read that? 16 to 21? Yeah, go ahead, Patty.
And the Philistine drew near morning and evening and presented himself 40 days. And Jesse said unto David his son, Take now for thy brethren an ephah of this parched corn and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to thy brethren, and carry these 10 cheeses unto the captain of their 1,000, and look how thy brethren fare, and take their pledge. How far?
21.
Okay. Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. And David rose up early in the morning and left the sheep with a keeper and took and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the trench as the host was going forth to the fight and shouted for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, and army against army.
Okay, a couple things. David's back taking care of sheep, and his dad says, I want you to take some food to your brothers and also to the captains. An ephah, by the way, is 30 pounds. He had 30 pounds of corn.
Wow, that's a lot.
Now, if you think 50 pounds is usually a sack for animal feed, but 30 pounds, that's heavy, and he came a long way.
He's a little guy.
And he's a little guy, he's not old, but it says later on that he left the cart with his servant or with his friend. So he had to have pulled a cart or something with maybe donkeys, who knows. But it says he had 30 pounds of parched corn, 10 loaves. Loaves don't weigh that much. But cheeses. They estimate that cheeses come in like 5-pound packs, maybe 10. So if you figure he had 10 of them, so he's got a load. This is not, he wasn't carrying them on his shoulder.
Back then, cheese would have been done in a huge.
And that's true,
Yeah.
especially when he's taking it to the army and they're all going to have to get some. Yeah, it could have been much heavier than 5 pounds. I'm just going by a small one.
And he told him to run,
Yeah, get there quick.
not walk, but run.
So verse 20, it shows you David's care for the sheep. He left someone in charge of his sheep. He just didn't walk away. Well, sheep, you got to take care of yourselves. I'm on a mission. No, he left them with. And so it says, verse 22, he left his carriage in the hand of a keeper. So he had a load of food, and he's leaving it there, and he's running to the army, saluted his brethren. Now, we see a little bit going on, a little dynamic between him and his brothers. He's not well received. It's almost like they say, you little squirt, what are you doing here? Go home.
We're men.
What are you doing here? All right, so he's talking to his brothers. Somebody want to read 23 on? 23 to 28 or so? Yeah.
23. And as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words, and David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were sore afraid. And the men of Israel said, Have ye seen this man that is come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up. And it shall be that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. And David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, What shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God?
Right.
And the people answered him after this manner, saying, So shall it be done to the man that killeth him.
All right. So David gets to hear Goliath, and he does say, hey, what's the reward for killing this guy? I'm not sure that as a young kid he was really that excited about getting the daughter of the king. It doesn't give the impression that he was a Casanova or anything like that. But he does marry Saul's daughter later. Michal, I think her name is Michael. So he asks, at verse 26 here, he says, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Boy, that shows incredible maturity for a young fellow. We don't know how young he is, maybe a teenager. Yeah. Defying the armies of the living God. So here he is out taking care of sheep, and he comes into this battle scene, potential battle scene, And he's like, what's the problem here? You know, God's on our side. What's this guy standing up there making fun of our God, making fun of us? Well, verse 28, the older brother gets kind of mad, yells at his younger brother. Somebody want to read 28 to 32? Just breaking it up into small chunks here. 28 to 32, anybody?
I'll read it.
Yeah.
And Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spake unto the men. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, Why comest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride and the naughtiness of thine heart. For thou art come down that thou mightest see the battle. And David said, What have I done? What have I now done? Is there not a cause? And he turned from him toward another and spake after the same manner. And the people answered him again after the former manner. And when the words were heard which David spake, they rehearsed them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine.
All right. So David shows up with the food. Eliab here, boy, what he says is really mean to his brother, isn't it? He said, what did you come down here for? And what did you leave the sheep in the wilderness? You know, your job is with the sheep. Come on, go home. And then he says, I know your pride, the naughtiness of your heart. I don't know that he could see into David's heart. But think about it too. Let's not come down too hard on this guy. They're in battle. Well, they're ready for battle. They're tense. And he sees his younger brother show up. And so he just lets him have it. You do not belong here.
Well,
Go home.
And the younger brother is acting probably in his mind pretty,
Yeah.
snooty and arrogant,
Well,
because
why-
he doesn't imagine that his younger brother's gonna be able to really do anything.
Well,
So he thinks he'll just mount him off.
And look at the statement that David makes.
Yeah.
He kind of put down, he's standing in this group of men, holding cheese and bread and all that, and he's going, what's the
wrong with
deal
you
here,
guys?"
guys? You know, I'm out there herding my sheep, and you guys can't take on one man? What do you do?
Well, and he also says, what have I done? My dad told me to bring food. He didn't really go there for the excitement. He just obeyed his father.
It sounds to me a lot like what Satan tries to do when we stand up for God.
And that's-
Oh, your pride. That's
Yeah.
just your
He's
pride
trying to stop
speaking.
it.
Or
Yeah.
you're naughty. I know your past, or I know your mistakes and your weaknesses. You shouldn't, just go away. You shouldn't even be involved here. And I think he wants to put us down when we're ready to do a great work for God
that's a-
Yeah.
by saying, you wee little thing.
You don't have any right to be there.
Yeah.
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 Leave it to the big guys.
Yeah.
Who are you? All right.
The other thing is they didn't realize though that David, his heart was right with
Right.
God.
Right.
They didn't see him, so they had no idea
Yeah.
what he did and how he worshiped and,
Yeah. There's quite an age difference here. These older guys, they're probably out of the house. Who knows?
Oh,
And
yeah.
they didn't hang out that much together because he was always with the sheep.
Right.
So they don't really know him.
Yeah, they got things to do.
But look at what David says to Saul. This is pretty mature. Look what he says. David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail. Because of him, thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. You don't need to worry. I'll go fight the guy. And you're like, what?
Oh, and Saul's got this demon thing going on.
Yeah, right.
He's like, what? Oh,
And we're going to talk about some of the effects of the troubling demon, but in a minute here when we get further on. But look at what. So Saul says to David, verse 33, you can't go against this Philistine, for you're but a youth, and he's a man of war. In other words, he has a lot of experience fighting. Who do you think you are? Well, David said to Saul, and I like this because what he said was he didn't argue with Saul. He just said, let me tell you what kind of experience I have. And what's he say? A lion, verse 34, right? A lion came and a bear and took a lamb out of the flock, and I went after him, smote him, took it right out of his mouth. Well, and I'm sure Saul's sitting there going, whoa, that's pretty impressive. But what's that have to do with Goliath? Well, and he goes on, and he says, when he arose against me, I caught him by the beard and smote him and slew him. So I didn't just rescue the lamb, I took care of business. Finished the job. All right. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing as he has once again defiled the armies of the living God. So, David is confident that God has been faithful to him in his struggles, and he said, moreover, the Lord has delivered me out of the paw of the lion, out of the paw of the bear. He will deliver me out of the hand of the Philistine. So Saul said, go, and the Lord be with you. So what is the basis of his confidence?
His faith.
His faith. That God has been faithful to him. Listen, folks, never underestimate the experience of God in your life. You can look back and you say, if God has been faithful, then he's going to continue to be faithful, right? You can look back and you can rehearse. I often repeat this hymn, count your many blessings, name them one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord has done. Go back and count the blessings. And if you have to, be like David and say, hey, this happened to me, God delivered me. All right, so David is doing that. And Saul is impressed. Saul armed David, to verse 38, with his armor, put on him the helmet of brass. Now, remember that Saul was a tall guy. He was head and shoulders above everybody. It was one of his characteristics. So who would have been the logical one to fight Goliath? The tallest one in Israel. But he's not as tall as Goliath. So he's somewhat of a coward, right? He's a coward. And he's going to put his heavy armor or tall stuff on a little guy. How illogical is that? It fit him, and he wouldn't fight Goliath, so he takes it off and puts it on the little guy, and it's not going to fit him. Yeah, poor guy.
It reminds me of what Paul said to Timothy. He said, don't let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example of the believers in word and conversation and charity. So even if David was killed, I'm sure it would have motivated, I mean, here we are with the what ifs again, but it would have motivated the Israelites to maybe said, if that little guy could try, I'll try too.
Yeah.
What am I doing?
He gave it his best shot.
My brother get killed.
Yeah.
Be an example.
So verse 39, David puts on all this armor, and it doesn't fit. And he goes, I'm putting my own words in here, but David said, I can't go with these. Like, dude, these don't fit me. This is not going to work. You know, you use your own language, but he's telling him, I can't do this. All right, so David put them off. All right, so he took his staff in his hand. Now, there's a lot. I'll say this. Some things in the Bible are explained, some are not. Some we just let go. A lot of people have tried to make sermons out of the 5 stones. Because it says he chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook, put them in his shepherd's bag, even in the script, and his sling was in his hand. He drew near to the Philistine. I've heard sermons on the 5. Some people say, well, Goliath had 4 brothers. So he had one for Goliath and all his brothers. Well, we don't know that. We know he had one brother. Later on, his brother is mentioned, but we don't know about the rest. 5. Some people say, well, that means he wasn't really sure he was going to hit the first time, so he's going to get another rock out and try again. He was only going to give himself 5 tries.
Well, how many hunters go out with one bow?
Yeah.
That's true. So I think we just have to say it was his custom to reach down, get a few stones, put them in his bag, and go forth. Let's not try and make more out of it than it is, right? Are you all with me on that? Let's just leave it at that. It's 5 stones.
the stones that Joshua used to
Right,
build an altar.
right.
This is stones that are smooth, so it goes straight.
Yeah, and a smooth stone, you can talk about the aerodynamics, goes faster and straighter than a jagged one because there's wind resistance or whatever. But remember, there's only one spot that was not covered with armor. Everything else, top, front, legs, everything, shield, but he had to look. And so he had his forehead right here free, and that's right where we're going to find. So verse 41, the Philistine came, drew near. The man that bare the shield went before him. So Goliath not only has his armor, but he's got someone standing in front of him with a shield.
How big is the shield?
So he's invincible.
Yeah.
There's no way you're going to get to this guy. But remember, Goliath has to be able to see. And that's the flaw. He did not protect the area of his face that he used to see. All right. When the Philistine looked, saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy, fair. The Philistine said, am I a dog that you come after me with sticks or staves? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Now, this is an interesting one. I know Jim and I have been talking about language. There's a difference between blaspheming and cursing. Blasphemy means take the name of God and bring it down to the gutter. That's using the name's Lord in vain, vanity, not holy. But there's also, the Bible speaks of inappropriate speech, which would be, bad language, just not using words gracefully. And it says here, where is it? Verse, which one was there? Oh, verse 43. He cursed David by his gods. So David has a chance to hear this Goliath guy cursing him and using his gods in the curse. Now, the Israelites, that would be called blasphemy. But not for them because their gods are fake, right? They're gods of idol, and so they mean nothing. But he's now bringing his gods to play on this thing. Now, remember the promise. You send a guy out, I'll fight him. Whoever wins will serve you. So really, it's a play between gods.
Yeah.
Are you see what's going on here?
Yes.
Because Goliath is bringing his gods into the conflict. It's not just a big guy 9 foot 4 inches that happens to be a good fighter fighting against someone. It's he's identifying with his gods. What's David doing? He's identifying with the God of Israel. So God against God.
Can I give a cross reference?
Yeah.
Judges 16:23. Then the lords of the Philistines gathered them together to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon their god, and to rejoice, for they said, our God hath delivered Samson our enemy into our hand. And when the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, our God hath delivered Dagon into our hands, our enemy, and the destroyer of our country, who slew many of us. Remember, Dagon was the one who lost his hands and his head.
Yeah, they couldn't have the ark and Dagon in the same building.
And those were the same
Yeah.
Philistines.
But here's another thing. When Moses one time was fed up, and God says, I'm going to push the reset button. I'm done with this murmuring. I'm done with all this. I'm just going to start over again. And Moses goes to God and he uses this very argument. He says, God, if you destroy the Israelites, that is going to give the enemies of Israel, enemies of your name, a chance to mock you, that you couldn't work through your people. See, God promised, I'm going to choose a nation, a people, and I'm going to spread, and they're going to bless the whole world. They're going to, abundantly reproduce, and they're going to be a big nation. If you destroy them, you're giving the people around a chance to mock and say, see that? Their God can't do what he says he does. He's not really a God. And so Moses goes to God and he says, God, please, on behalf of your name, for your name's sake, don't do this. All right, you following me here? So it is really, let's say, a conflict between God and the gods around them.
Well, the man-made God.
The man-made
Big
gods.
G,
Yeah.
little g.
Yeah. Okay. So Verse 44, the Philistines, well, somebody want to read 44 through 48? Who's
I'll
got-
do it.
Yeah, go ahead.
And the Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air, and to the beasts of the field." Then said David to the Philistine, "Thou comest to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defiled. This day will the Lord deliver thee into my hand, and I will smite thee, and take thine head from thee, and I will give the carcass of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel." How far?
You can keep going.
Okay. "And all the assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and spear, for the battle is yours, and he will give you into our hands. And it came to pass, when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag, and took thence a stone, and slang it." Wow. "And smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon the face of the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword, and drew it out of the sheath thereof, and slew him, and cut off the head therewith. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled."
All right. So David makes it clear what this battle's about, right? It's what he says back in verse 46. He says that all the earth may know there's a God in Israel. You just swore at me with your gods, cursed at me, but I'm going to show you that our God is the true God. All right.
And he's powerful.
What good was the shield bearer?
Well, nothing, because the stone went up to the head.
Yeah, but David even ran past him to cut off this.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, once he hit him, he went down.
yeah, he went down.
Then he took his sword out.
Yeah.
I don't know how he gets to that sword.
Well, it was a heavy sword. How much? 120 pounds or so? I don't know. This was a heavy sword. David didn't even have a sword. So think about this, guys. When he said, "I'm going to cut your head off," what did he have to cut his head off with? He didn't even have a hunter's knife, nothing. So he was speaking in faith, really. When I get to that point, I'll figure out there's got to be a sword around or something.
It was a big one.
Yeah. So he took the sword and he finished the job. And verse 51, remember I said, how good is the promise of thieves? When the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they all bowed down and said, "We're servants," right? No. So we see it being played out. All right. Do you all see these interesting things here? Isn't this interesting how there's seeds of thought and then later on they come to fulfillment? The writer here, that's the way writers are, right, Sarah? Aren't you a writer there, mystery writer? And
We try.
you know Sarah's got a book coming out, right? Pretty soon?
Yeah.
All right. I know we're online here, so I better not say anything, but anyway, I hear it's a good book. Because I know I'm related to your proofreader.
Oh, good.
I see her reading the parts. All right. The men of Israel, verse 52. Now somebody else has to read that. 52 through the end. Anybody want to read that? Yeah. Go ahead, Ed.
Which one?
To the end of the chapter.
Okay. And the men of Israel and Judah rose with a shout and pursued the Philistines as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron, so that the wounded Philistines fell on the way from the Jordan as far as Gath and Ekron. And the people of Israel came back from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their camp. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it into Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. As soon as Saul saw David go out against the Philistines, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, "Abner, whose son is this you?" And Abner said, As your soul lives, O king, I do not know. And the king said, inquire whose son the boy is. And as soon as David returned from the striking down of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, whose son are you, young man? And David answered, I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite.
Okay. Couple things. Notice what these Philistines did. They fled from a little boy, right? The fear was so intense, they didn't even stop to pick up their things. Because they fled, and then the Israelites plundered their camp. They didn't even take their valuables with them. Well, when you're in a hurry, I guess you don't worry about it, right?
Because they got fired up, right?
Yeah.
The Israelites, they saw David, this little guy,
Right.
take out their man,
And their courage was, they got strength and, all
Spread.
right. So,
Still had 4 stones.
good job, yes. You know, I wonder if he took out a few Philistines while they were running. I mean, why waste the stones, right? That's good, Luann. I didn't think about that. Yeah, if this kid took down Goliath with one, we better get out of here. Yeah, right. You know, I said that we would talk about Saul's condition. And I want to point this out in verse 55. Look how odd this is. When Saul saw David go forth, he said to Abner, the captain, whose son is this? Now, wait a minute. What had David been doing? He had been playing music. What had Saul asked permission? He had asked his father if David could come and stay with him. And now he has no clue who this kid is.
He even outfitted him with his armor.
Yeah, right. He's like, who is that out there? So
But David is also taking care of the sheep, so he's not there all the time.
he's not. But you think he had to have noticed the boy.
Yes,
And I wrote in my margin, Saul's state of confusion. You see, when the Spirit of God went away from him, he was left to nothing but confusion and human reasoning. And he's so confused, he's so agitated, he can't even remember who this kid is that played music for him. And he asked permission of his father for him to be in the court. Go back in chapter 16, let me show you. So you know I'm not making it up. 16:20. And Jesse took an ass laden with bread and a bottle of wine and a kid and sent them by David. David came to Saul and stood before him, and he loved him greatly, and he became his armor bearer. He saw this kid, he loved him greatly, and now he doesn't even know who he is. So, and then later on he asked permission. All right, so he says, verse 56, inquire whose son this is, and David returned from the slaughter, and he tells him he's the son of Jesse. Now Jesse is old at this point, but he goes back after this, goes back to the sheep. Interesting how God is bringing him into the scene and then removing him. He's protecting him, because we're going to find later that Saul tries to kill him. Throws his javelin at him a couple times. I mean, God's with this boy. Definitely. Let me just finish up. I'm going to put a seed of thought in your mind, because somebody came to me after, I think it was last week, or maybe Sunday, talked about the Nephilim. We're not going to spend time tonight on that, but I want to put a seed of thought in your mind. Back in Genesis, it says that the sons of God went into the daughters of men, and they had kids, and there were giants in the land. They're called Nephilim. Nephilim simply means fallen ones, doesn't mean giant. King James translates it giant. And if you talk to theologians, it's sad they do that, because it's what they call a paraphrase. Giants comes later because they were tall, but Nephilim simply means fallen ones. And so these are ones that existed before the flood. There were giants. But what happened in the flood? Because some people say, well, Goliath might have come from that line of the Nephilim. Well, the problem is God said he was going to destroy all living creatures. So all the creatures of the earth were killed except for Noah and his 3 sons and 3 daughter-in-laws and wife, right? All right, so we know that Goliath couldn't have been from that strain. But what happened after the flood, because there were only 3 families, 3 boys and 3 ladies, and they populated the earth, somehow there were genes in there that some of the tribes must have turned out to be bigger than others. Now, there is a condition, I think, what's it called? Gargantism, but that usually is a mutation and it doesn't, it's not for the good.
Right.
People that have that usually can't walk real well, their joints aren't.
Right.
So we're not talking about that. We must be talking about some hereditary largeness that these people developed.
Typically, well, not typically, I mean, you see a whole mix of people, but it's not unusual for taller people to
Yeah.
marry taller people.
Right.
Shorter people to marry shorter people.
That's true.
And so, those things are gonna just over time.
Yeah.
These guys go
Come to
this way,
fruition.
these guys go this way.
Now, we do know that later on in David's reign, he does fight more sons of Anakin. Goliath wasn't the last. So there were a bunch of them living down in Gaza. Gaza, think of Gaza. That's in the news today, isn't it? Well, Hebron is in the south, and Gaza, that's where these people lived. But when David, later on, I think it's 2 Samuel 20 or so, he fights more descendants of Anakin, and they have 6 fingers on each hand. I mean, these guys were a little different. 6 toes, 6 fingers. Can you imagine? 24 digits.
More, speaking again of hereditary traits.
And it was hereditary. It had to be.
Mutation
So,
of sorts?
yeah. And so they eventually wiped them out. They eventually were destroyed totally. But they lived around. So someday, I want to just take some time and look at those Nephilim. Because I'll tell you what, my point of view is this. I'm not going to go into it real heavy, but if the Bible doesn't say it, we just leave it.
Right.
You can go online and you can Google Nephilim, and you will find the craziest stuff.
Absolutely.
Demons cohabitated with men and had these giants, and they were monsters, and the Bible never says that. In fact, Nephilim doesn't even mean giant. It just means fallen ones. So if you look, and I remember Dr. Harrison when he was going through the timeline. Some of you that were in the timeline might have remembered this. Genesis chapter 4, you have the descendants of Cain. Remember, Adam and Eve only had 2 kids, Cain and Abel. Cain killed Abel. So there's only one left. So you've got the strain of Cain, and then they had another son named Seth. So when you get to the time of the flood, there's only 2 lines. There's only Cain and there's Seth and their family. What do we know about Seth? He was a wild man. He was untamed. He went out to live in the wilderness. He walked away from God. No, I'm sorry. Cain did. I'm getting all mixed. Yeah, Cain did. Not right. Seth. Sorry. Cain was the one who went out. He would be the daughters of the world. He would be the ones who were away from God. And there was breeding, I guess, or marriage between those 2 lines. And it got so bad. And there were giants in the land, so it must have been similar to this, where God said, wipe them out, let's start all over again. And so you have Noah, who is actually of the line of Cain. All right, so we can talk about that later, but...
Noah's the line of Cain?
I got it.
No, Seth. I'm getting mixed up, folks, in my mind. What's
I
Earl?
figured it out. This was one family, same blood, but since they had to have daughters, then there was incest. Incest creates weird people, 6 fingers, real tall.
Could be.
Yeah.
All right. Well, and you remember in the beginning, Adam and Eve only had 2, so who did they marry, They had to marry their sisters or something. So in the beginning, there was some intermarriage, but yeah. But we will...
Purity of genealogy.
Yes. There weren't the defects that we have today. But we can study the Nephilim at some time in the future. It's a fascinating study, if you look at that. But let's just put it to rest. Goliath, is not a Nephilim.
Okay.
He's not in Genesis. Okay, he's after the flood, so this is when it started all over. It must have been a genetic thing. So what are some of the takeaways we can get from this? Here's one. We often think of David as, oh, what a man of faith. He had so much faith to go up against this Goliath guy. Let me read something. The David story, rather than being a story of what God does for those with faith, shows us what faithfulness looks like and what the faithful can do with wisdom and skill. It models the significance of developing skills and mastering one's abilities, building real competence and confidence in God. Don't stand around waiting for God to act or for God to win your battles for you. Don't stand around watching for God, what God might do. Rather, show God what you can do. Gain wisdom, gather knowledge, develop skills, give the Lord something to use as he looks through the earth, unfolding his glorious will. I know those are a lot of words. Well, here's what it says. David just didn't appear on the scene as a nobody, having no experience, and all of a sudden God gave him great faith. No, he had all these experiences. He had fought lions, he had cared for sheep, and he says, with all that God has been using me in, why can't I just do more?
Yeah.
This is nothing compared to what I've been dealing with. So if we sit in our, I said that on Sunday, if we sit in our little rocket chair, right?
Yeah.
Well, God, I guess you can use me, but I don't know. I don't know what I'll just sit here. Yeah, I'll just sit here until you use me. No. Let God use you, and based on those experiences, he'll use you in greater and greater and greater ways. That's the way he works. So this story is not just a story of a little kid with a lot of faith. It's a story of a kid who was faithful with the little things that God asked him to do. Take care of the sheep, protect them, be obedient to your dad, stand up to your brothers when they start yelling at you and doing this. Just say, what did I do wrong? You know, don't retaliate. Just obey, and then God will use you in a mighty way. But you know what our natural instinct is? Well, I'm going to sit here and wait.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to do, so I'm not going to do anything.
Let someone else.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's get involved. Let's do what God, let's follow God. And like you said, don't retaliate. Trust God.
Use the gifts that God gave you.
Right. That's true.
I think that's what made the difference.
All right, so let's pray, folks. Time is up. Oh,
It made me think
Oh.
about this boy Jose. His biggest goal is to look like he's doing something busy. So he can get away with doing nothing.
but is it productive busyness?
Whatever, it's not, it's barely productive. Anyway, he could stand some lifting up prayer.
Oh, okay.
Confused mom.
All right.
One last thing.
Yes.
She talked about spiritual gifts and stuff like that. Maybe we need to do a study on everyone's gifts.
Gifts of the Spirit. Yes.
Spiritual gifts.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's pray, folks. Lord God, we thank you for this young fellow, David, who followed you with the little steps in his life, and then you gave him greater and greater and greater things to do, and then he eventually became king. Then he wrote the book of Psalms. He fought battles. Little by little, you gave him more and more responsibility as he was faithful. Lord, help us to be faithful. Help us to have that faith in you that says, I'll do what I can. I want to see God at work. And we want to just see you at work around here, around us. We want to lift you up. We want your name to be great. And help us to win those battles too. We want you to win those battles with us, for us, as we face each of our battles each day. Take us home safely, we pray. Thank you for this time. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. All right, 1 Samuel 18 next week, so read up on it. Thank you, Ernie.